There is a very specific kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you love someone who cannot love you back. It is a quiet, heavy heartbreak that lives deep inside the chest, a constant, dull ache that never quite goes away because you are carrying the weight of two people entirely on your own shoulders. It is a lonely pain, and what makes it feel so isolating is that nobody on the outside looking in can truly understand the invisible prison you are living inside. You wake up every single morning with a knot in your stomach, walking on eggshells in your own home, constantly scanning the room and reading the subtle shifts in their facial expressions or the tone of their voice, just to figure out what kind of day it is going to be. You spend your entire life managing their moods, absorbing their anger, and swallowing your own tears, all while pretending to the rest of the world that everything is fine. This profound loneliness exists because your entire relationship is built entirely on a tragic illusion. You are not actually loving the person standing right in front of you. Instead, you are deeply in love with a ghost, a carefully constructed fantasy of who they pretended to be in the very beginning, or the potential you know they are entirely capable of reaching if they just tried. You keep looking at them and seeing the flashes of sweetness or the rare moments of vulnerability, and you use those tiny crumbs of hope to convince yourself that the cruel, cold, manipulative person is just an exception to the rule. You tell yourself a comforting lie every single night before you fall asleep, that the real them is hidden somewhere underneath all that trauma and anger, and that it is your job to excavate it. You carry the exhausting, back-breaking belief that if you could just find a way to be a little softer, a little more patient, or a little more understanding, they would finally have that long-awaited breakthrough moment. You genuinely believe that your love is the missing puzzle piece, that if you just love them hard enough, long enough, and selflessly enough, it will act like a magic spell that heals their broken places and turns them into a safe, loving partner. Whenever a massive fight erupts out of nowhere over something completely meaningless, you don't walk away. Instead, you shrink yourself down. You quiet your own rightful anger, swallow your pride, and become hyper-flexible, convincing yourself that holding on through just one more explosive rage or offering one more deep, unconditional forgiveness will finally make them look you in the eyes, truly see the devastating depth of your pain, and make the conscious choice to change. You tell yourself that this time will be different. You believe that if you explain your feelings with enough clarity, if you show them enough grace, or if you sacrifice just a little bit more of your boundaries, your sanity, and your own needs, they will finally wake up and realize what they are losing. But you are pouring your precious energy, your valuable time, and your entire soul into a bottomless pit. You are desperately trying to fill a vessel that has no bottom, completely convinced that eventually all that relentless love, all those tears, and all those sacrifices will magically come back to you in the form of the healthy, loving, stable person you always hoped and prayed they could become. If you are watching this video right now, and your heart is beating a little faster because every single word feels like it was ripped straight out of your private diary, there is a very high chance that you have spent months, consecutive years, or maybe even decades of your life operating under that exact, draining assumption. You have spent your entire life shrinking yourself, over-explaining yourself, and bleeding out your own emotional reserves just to keep them whole, while your own soul is completely starved of affection, safety, and basic respect. Let's skip the pleasantries, leave the sugarcoating behind, and look directly at the hard, unvarnished truth that you need to hear in order to finally break free from this cycle. Kindness will never fix a narcissist. It does not matter how pure your intentions are, how deep your compassion runs, or how often you forgive them. You can pour every ounce of your soul into trying to heal their wounds, show up with an open heart through every storm, and love them with a devotion that moves mountains, but it will never change the outcome. You are operating under the deeply ingrained human belief that if you just treat someone well, show them respect, and love them unconditionally, they will eventually rise up to meet you and treat you the same way. But with a narcissist, that golden rule of human connection simply does not exist. In their psychological world, the fundamental laws of human connection are completely and utterly inverted. Normal people see your kindness as a precious gift, a sign of deep care, and a reason to cherish you more. A narcissist looks at that exact same kindness and processes it through a completely distorted lens. To them, the more you sacrifice your own needs, your time, and your peace for their sake, the less they value what you are giving them. They do not look at your endless sacrifices and see a reflection of your loyal, beautiful heart. Instead, they look at your willingness to bend over backwards and view it as absolute proof that your boundaries are cheap, weak, and completely negotiable. When you offer them your softness during a moment of conflict, they do not feel safe or loved. They see an open door, a glaring vulnerability, and a prime opportunity to exploit you further. When you hand over your forgiveness on a silver platter immediately after a brutal betrayal, they do not experience a wave of grace or relief. They take it as an explicit, glowing green light that tells them they can do it again, and worse, because you will always cave. Every single time you respond to their calculated cruelty, toxic jabs, and intentional disrespect with empathy and understanding, you are unknowingly teaching them a dangerous, irreversible lesson. You are teaching them that hurting you carries no real consequence, that your anger has no teeth, and that no matter how badly they treat you, you will always stick around to take the blow. Narcissism is never just a temporary emotional wound or a rough patch waiting to be smoothed out by the right person, the right amount of patience, or the right kind of love. You can spend years waiting for them to finally heal their inner child, hoping that someday the trauma of their past will melt away and leave behind the person you know they could be. But narcissism is not a wound. It is a rigid, impenetrable defense system built entirely from the ground up on a pathological, unyielding need for total control, a desperate sense of superiority over everyone around them, and a constant, uninterrupted supply of emotional reactions from the people they keep trapped in their orbit. They do not experience relationships the way normal people do, and they are not looking for a teammate to build a shared life with. When a narcissist looks at you, they do not see a separate human being with your own dreams, feelings, boundaries, and needs. They do not want a partner, and they are completely incapable of experiencing genuine intimacy, vulnerability, or true emotional connection. What they actually want is a compliant mirror that reflects them in the absolute most flattering light possible at every single moment of the day. Someone who exists solely to validate their fragile ego while absorbing all of their toxic waste. They want total, unchecked access to your emotional reserves, draining your joy, your confidence, and your peace whenever they feel empty inside, treating your heart like an endless resource station that they can pull from whenever it suits them. This toxic dynamic inevitably locks you into a devastating psychological trap known as intermittent reinforcement, which functions down to a science, exactly like a flashing slot machine in a casino. If they treated you like absolute garbage every single second of every single day, walking away from them would be the easiest thing in the world because your survival instincts would kick in and scream at you to run. But that is never how it works, and that is precisely why you are still stuck. They pull you in with suffocating, intoxicating amounts of love, attention, and flattery, making you feel like you are the most important person on the planet, only to drop you into a freezing, cruel abyss of silent treatment and harsh criticism over absolutely nothing. You do not stay in this living nightmare because the relationship is actually good or because you enjoy the misery. You stay because that extreme, terrifying unpredictability creates a literal chemical obsession deep inside your nervous system. Your brain gets hijacked by the chaotic highs of their sudden validation and manufactured affection because the agonizing lows of their rejection, anger, and coldness feel utterly unbearable to survive. You become like an addict chasing a fix, desperately enduring the abuse just to get that tiny, fleeting taste of the person they pretended to be at the very beginning, completely unaware that the game was rigged against you from the very first day. Most people waste precious years of their lives trying to shock, punish, or wake up a narcissist by using completely the wrong tools, walking straight into a trap without even realizing it. You think that if you scream loud enough, cry hard enough, issue severe threats, or even try to plot some clever revenge, you will finally make them see the magnitude of what they have done to you. But every single one of those desperate attempts fails completely and miserably. Because chaos is not something a narcissist fears, chaos is actually their natural, most comfortable environment. They thrive right in the middle of the storm they created, knowing exactly how to twist every single word, gaslight you into questioning your own sanity, and make you look like the crazy, unstable one to everyone else watching. Every single time you try to fight back, argue your point, or beg them to change, you are walking right into their trap and handing your personal power directly back to them on a silver platter. What genuinely destabilizes a narcissist down to their absolute core has nothing to do with drama, screaming matches, or grand gestures of anger. It has nothing to do with making them jealous or trying to beat them at their own toxic game. Because any emotional response at all, even negative ones, tells them they still own a piece of you. What actually shatters their reality is your total, absolute, ironclad emotional detachment, a state of mind where you simply stop playing entirely. It is that terrifying moment for them when you stop giving them the fuel they have survived on for years, choosing instead a quiet, unshakable internal stillness that completely cuts off their supply. The exact second you finally drop the rope in that endless tug of war, stop wasting your breath explaining your logic. Stop exhausting yourself trying to defend your character against lies. And stop needing them to finally understand your point of view or admit they were wrong. Their entire internal world begins to violently collapse. You have to realize a profound truth about how they operate. Their power never actually lived in their fake charm, their intimidating presence, or their cruel, calculated words. Their power lived entirely inside your emotional reaction to them, your tears, your anger, and your desperate need for their validation. The moment you starve them of that reaction and let it vanish into thin air, their entire grip on your life dissolves into nothingness. When you finally cross that invisible line and go genuinely quiet, not out of a loud, raging anger meant to punish them or provoke a reaction, but out of a cold, heavy, unshakable silence born from pure, unadulterated indifference, the narcissist will experience an internal panic unlike anything they have ever known. Because you have completely cut off their emotional supply and stopped feeding the dynamic that kept them feeling superior, their internal world starts to implode under the terrifying weight of their own irrelevance. To a narcissist, being treated as completely unimportant and completely invisible to you feels like an actual psychological death sentence, and they simply do not know how to function without your attention. In response to this sudden freezing void, they will cycle through every single tool in their toxic playbook to see what still works. They might fly into a blind, terrifying rage, trying to break your spirit through intimidation. They might launch a malicious smear campaign behind your back, whispering lies to anyone who will listen to try and salvage their fragile ego and paint you as the villain. But when they realize that your wall of indifference is holding strong, they will pivot to their most dangerous weapon of all. They will deploy an absolute masterclass performance of fake tears, trembling lips, deep remorse, and grand sweeping promises about the future. They will say every single word you spent months or years begging to hear, mimicking profound self-reflection, just well enough to make you believe that a miracle has happened and that they have finally changed. You must recognize that performance for what it is down to its core. Pure, desperate survival. Nothing more, nothing less. It is not an awakening, it is not a breakthrough, and it is certainly not love. It is nothing more than a cornered predator fighting tooth and nail to protect its food supply and secure its next meal of emotional fuel. The tragic trap is that the very second you let your guard down, soften your stance, and step back into their toxic orbit, the mask drops instantly, disappearing without a trace. The cycle of abuse resumes immediately, and it usually comes back with an intensity that is twice as brutal as before, because they have now tested your limits and learned the exact psychological price it takes to reel you right back into their trap. True victory does not happen when they finally apologize, when they admit defeat, or when they realize what they lost, because you are looking outward for validation that will never come. True victory happens the exact precise moment you stop measuring your personal progress by their external behavior. If you are constantly checking to see if they are miserable, if they miss you, or if they have moved on to someone else, you are still handing them the keys to your emotional kingdom. Real freedom means their actions, their words, and their entire existence become completely irrelevant to your peace of mind. Closure is never something a narcissist hands to you on a silver platter. It is a sacred gift that you finally choose to give to yourself. You are fully, unconditionally allowed to walk away from anyone who only knows how to love you in broken fragments, crumbs, and conditional terms. You are allowed to choose a quiet, predictable, beautiful life of peace over a loud, exhausting, soul-crushing life of endless chaos. And you are allowed to let them think, write, or tell whatever twisted, fabricated version of the story they want to the rest of the world, because you no longer need to correct their narrative or defend your character. You never needed to be a kinder person. You never needed to try harder to fix things, and you never needed to love them louder. You just needed to finally put down the heavy burdens, stop fighting a war you were never meant to win, and finally come home to yourself.